At 04:17 a.m. on 7th October 1942, over the dense jungle canopy of the Solomon Islands, a low-flying C-47 transport rumbles in on final approach to Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Inside its belly, Staff Sergeant Tom Hank Harrison, a carpenter-turned-field-engineer with the 2nd Battalion, 164th Infantry Regiment, United States Army, braces against his harness as the aircraft yaws and touches down with a crunch of gravel and jungle debris scattered across the bare runway. His mission: install a stripped-down beehive-style dispenser rig of his own devising to release local, honey-derived sugar bait into mosquito-breeding pools around the critical airstrip. The official medical log for the Pacific Theatre already recorded that malaria incapacitated 60% or more of frontline troops in forward positions. Hank's hands shake from fatigue and the weight of urgency pressing on his shoulders. One miscalculation and the entire advance, and thousands of lives, could stall in the jungle heat. The rustle of palm fronds, the hum of mosquitoes gathering in the pre-dawn darkness, the taste of sweat and diesel fuel, all converge on this fragile wooden tool, and somewhere unseen in the humid air, the smallest enemy readies its strike. On 7th October 1942, at Lunga Point, Guadalcanal, already 3 weeks into the invasion that began on 7th August, the airfield glows under improvised floodlights as dawn breaks over the Pacific. Hank Harrison stands beside his hawser crate, wooden slats uniform under his well-worn tool belt, on the ramp of a bare-bones engineering depot established by the 1st Engineer Special Brigade. He wipes axle grease from his hands, scanning the muddy strip where P-40 Warhawk fighters taxi through the morning gloom, their engines coughing blue exhaust into humid air. His goal: adapt discarded ammunition crates into a series of honeybait dispensers designed to lure and trap the night-biting anopheline mosquitoes that have been devastating troop strength across the island perimeter. He recalls the stark language of the MAGECOM memo circulated 3 weeks prior. The malaria situation is, in my candid and conservative opinion, such that it will greatly impair the efficiency of the whole army. The words carry weight that extends far beyond medical statistics. The jungle air presses heavy and damp, salt carried inland from the sea, mixing with the rot of vegetation. He hears the hum of rotating propellers warming up for morning sorties, the distant mechanical thump of a diesel generator struggling under load, and the soft, persistent hiss of mosquitoes gathering near his exposed ears and neck. Nearby, Private First Class Owens chafes at the net rigging assignment, complaining loudly that half the mosquito nets issued to his squad ripped during the first night of use, the thin fabric no match for coral's sharp branches and careless handling. Hank's only answer is to mutter something about improvisation being the engineer's first tool, then return, his attention to the crate before him. As he hammers a reinforcing slat into place, the first problem appears. Owens snaps that the prototype bait cartridge leaked overnight, sticky honey oozing onto his boots and attracting a swarm of flies. The smell of fermenting sugar at 5 in the morning in jungle humidity hits Hank's nostrils, sweet, heavy, slightly rotten, like overripe fruit left in the sun. He glances down the slope toward the strip below, where mechanics are replacing a damaged radial engine on a Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber, their tools ticking against metal, the smell of oil and warm aluminum rising in waves. His internal clock ticks upward with every passing hour. If the trap goes operational by midnight, the mosquitoes will shift behavior patterns, and the medical log indicates they change to crepuscular biting cycles when nets are deployed. The stakes become clearer. If the dispenser system fails, Net coverage and the atabrine prophylaxis routine alone will not hold the line against disease. He pulls out a hand-drawn sketch from his shirt pocket. His plan to connect honey bait with a slow-release mesh screen positioned near stagnant water pools where mosquitoes breed. The wheels are in motion, but he knows nothing yet about the risk lying ahead in the humid darkness. A single mosquito drifts past in the strengthening dawn light, wings catching the sun. The chapter ends as he secures the final bolt on the prototype unit and hears the distant roar of a right radial engine starting up for its first combat sortie of the day. A subtle question hanging unanswered in the diesel-scented air. Will his improvised tool tip the balance in a war fought on two fronts? Later that same day, mid-afternoon, humidity settles like a wet blanket over the airstrip perimeter. Hank crouches beside a shallow drainage ditch along the airstrip's eastern edge. Mud, brackish, standing water, and half-submerged palm stumps creating ideal mosquito habitat. The 164th Infantry's quartermaster rolled forward a supply of surplus honey canisters captured during a recent raid on a Japanese supply dump, and now Hank repurposes them into bait cartridges for his dispenser system. He scrapes thick honey into a mesh bag, adds a sugar yeast mixture intended to prolong fermentation, then places the bag carefully into his wooden dispenser frame, checking seals and connections. Nearby, the medical detachment logs another 27 confirmed cases of malaria in the last 48 hours from the 1st Battalion alone. Already one full rifle company is reduced to 60% operational strength. Men shivering with fever in makeshift tent hospitals. The numbers climb daily, relentless as the insects themselves. Hank's hands tremble slightly. The oppressive heat, the constant exposure to insects, the psychological weight pressing on his shoulders. He watches mosquitoes gather in small clouds around the standing water and wonders, will his honey bait draw them away from sleeping men or just concentrate them further in the operational area? A shade of fear tickles the back of his mind. His wife Martha back home in rural Virginia, his younger brother Danny still in basic training at Fort Benning. Neither knows about this makeshift trap being assembled on the front line of a jungle war. The distance between home and this fetid ditch feels infinite, measured not in miles but in worlds. Meanwhile, infantrymen trudge past along the muddy track, boots sucking in black volcanic mud with every step, and Hank notes that few are still maintaining full atabrine prophylaxis discipline. Some have stopped taking their daily tablets. The yellowing skin, persistent rumors of impotence and sterility, general dissatisfaction with side effects, all contribute to non-compliance that the medical officers cannot reverse through orders alone. One of the medical detachment officers, Captain Perez, pauses to caution Hank while inspecting the dispenser prototype. If this contraption works, you'll save men's lives and combat effectiveness. If it fails, they'll just get mosquito bitten while we scramble to fix another inadequate batch of nets. Hank nods acknowledgement, but inside he feels a tight knot of expectation and dread forming in his chest. He tightens a screen fastener on the dispenser frame and moves methodically to the next ditch section, measuring distances and calculating bait distribution rates in his head. As dusk falls, the sky bleeds orange and purple over the airstrip, light filtering through the jungle canopy in slanted beams. He lingers at the installation site, watching the sticky bait glisten in the dying light, mosquitoes beginning to flicker like small ghosts around the humid air above the water. He leaves the scene with a textured awareness of insect chorus, air saturated with the promise of impending rain and the omnipresent threat of disease vectored on tiny wings. The chapter closes with the first night shift approaching across the airfield and the silent, desperate hope that his improvised rig will hold operational integrity until dawn breaks again over the Pacific. That night, the jungle temperature drops only slightly from its daytime peak. Sweat beads at Hank's nape as he rises from a brief rest to check the bait units under handheld torchlight, moving carefully between installations. Around him, the rumble of a .50 caliber machine gun from the airfield's perimeter defense position echoes softly through the darkness, punctuated by the occasional crack of rifle fire from nervous sentries. Hurricane fighters from the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing Taxi slowly along the strip, engines idling at low RPM, pilots preparing for night alert duty. Hank inspects the first honeybait unit carefully. The mesh screen shows small puncture holes where insects have pierced the fabric. The honey liquid inside is thick and fermenting faster than expected, hinting at oversaturation in the humid tropical environment. He marks careful notes on his rain-dampened clipboard. Unit A, bait volume down 15% after 4 hours operational. Unit B, screen material torn at northeast corner. Unit C, standing water overflow threatening foundation stability. The observations pile up, each one a variable to control. Inside the medical tent 50 yards away, Private Miller shivers violently on his cot. High fever, bone-rattling chills, profuse sweating, the unmistakable clinical signs of acute malaria infection. The medical log shows 8 new hospital admissions by 2 in the morning. In one infantry platoon alone, nearly 20% strength lost to disease rather than combat. Hank glimpses the scene through the tent flap, red-rimmed eyes staring at nothing, sweat-drenched uniforms clinging to emaciated frames, the involuntary muscle tremors that accompany malarial paroxysms. This reality goes far beyond mechanical failure or engineering problems. It becomes a matter of life or death, of men who will live to fight or collapse uselessly in the jungle heat. In the stillness before dawn, Hank leans against a tripod-mounted lampstand, moisture dripping steadily off his helmet visor, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. He feels the crushing weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His improvised trap is a calculated gamble in this jungle war, a quiet invention deployed amid the boom of artillery and the rattle of small arms fire. The burden of proof rests entirely on whether this device can deliver measurable results before the malaria situation collapses unit cohesion entirely. The chapter ends when the rain begins. Hot, heavy drops pelting the wooden dispenser crates, the bait units rattling slightly on their improvised mounts, and Hank realizes with sharp clarity the first operational trial will decide whether hundreds of men live with combat effectiveness intact or limp through the jungle campaign as disease-weakened shadows, unable to hold ground or press the offensive forward against determined Japanese resistance along the ridgelines. By 5th November 1942 at Guadalcanal, 2 weeks after initial deployment, the situation continues worsening across the operational sector. The medical department reports that 40% of the 164th Infantry Regiment is classified as non-effective due to malaria infections, a catastrophic loss of combat power that threatens the entire island campaign. Inside the engineering assembly area, Hank and his assistant, Corporal Ramirez, work with urgent intensity to scale up the bait unit production and deployment. They have constructed 18 functional dispensers now, each connected via improvised rubber tubing to the network of ditch pools and stagnant water sources, each loaded with honey yeast cartridges fabricated from scrap metal drums and salvaged materials. The jungle's oppressive humidity becomes simultaneously a tool and an obstacle. The bait ferments faster than engineering calculations, predicted, attracting flies and other unintended pest species that compete for the sugar. Hank scrubs his safety goggles, free of condensation, while Ramirez holds a torch steady, illuminating their work in the pre-dawn darkness. At 10:23 in the morning, a supply transport truck rumbles into the depot area, diesel engine straining, unloading wooden crates, stenciled with medical markings. Atabrine, for prophylaxis only, do not skip daily tablets. Hank knows from bitter experience that many troops actively resent the anti-malarial drug. The yellowing skin, pigmentation, the persistent rumors of sexual impotence circulating through the ranks, and they skip doses whenever supervision lapses, preferring immediate comfort over long-term protection against disease. He walks past a bulletin board near the medical tent where the War Department's malaria awareness poster hangs, rain-stained, but still visible. This is Anne. She drinks blood, with a stylized cartoon mosquito illustration designed to drive home the danger. The messaging feels inadequate against the reality of men shaking with fever 50 feet away. Ramirez frowns and points. One bait dispenser is leaking honey directly into the soil, the connecting tubing kinked severely under accumulated leaves and debris. Hank kneels in the mud to repair it, his hands working quickly. The steady drip of honey onto the jungle floor glistens amber in a narrow beam of sunlight penetrating the canopy. They both hear the distinctive whine of mosquitoes cresting over the low vegetation. The insects seem closer and more numerous than before, despite the traps. The dispenser system hums with potential, but also carries significant risk. If insects infiltrate the cartridge system itself, the entire mechanism could fail catastrophically, providing no protection and wasting scarce resources. The engineering stakes mount with every passing hour. Hank rises from the mud, glances toward the airstrip. A medevac DC-3 transport is preparing for departure. Wounded infantry from the 1st Battalion already loaded on stretchers in the cargo bay, heading for rear area hospitals. The reality strikes him with renewed force. This is not a peacetime training exercise or theoretical problem. Real men are suffering out there with debilitating fever, emaciated bodies, and exhaustion compounded by both combat stress and parasitic disease. Hank's operational goal expands in his mind, not only build functional equipment, but continuously refine the design and deliver measurable results quickly enough to matter. The chapter ends when he catches sight of a discharge. Colonel Fletcher from the 164th Infantry passes through the operations area, eyes scanning the engineering work with professional assessment, flicking a stopwatch as if measuring efficiency. Hank reads the colonel's expression clearly, measuring progress, expecting results, calculating whether this unconventional approach will justify the resources invested. The bait units must perform, and soon. That evening, the overhead monsoon roars in with tropical intensity. Rain comes in solid sheets. Visibility drops to near zero. The jungle floor floods rapidly, and several bait units are semi-submerged in rising water. Hank and Ramirez battle desperately to elevate the compromised rigs on improvised stilts fabricated from scrap lumber and ammunition crate components. The mud sucks at their boots with every movement. Hank's shirt sticks to his back with a mixture of rain and sweat. He mutters curses under the drilled-in noise of the storm and the aggressive hiss of heavy tropical rain hammering vegetation. Together they strap the dispensers to palm trunks, anchor them with salvaged wire, and ensure the honey cartridge compartments remain sealed against water infiltration that would ruin the bait mixture. Inside the medical tent, another entry appears in the daily log. Units out of action due to malaria. 1st Regiment, 342 personnel. The log uses exact numbers drawn from Field Hospital Report Number 3, dated 2nd November 1942, each digit representing a soldier unable to fight. Hank grips the side of a soaked crate for stability, mud splattering his face and neck. He visualizes the mosquito vector in his mind. Anopheles minimus flavirostris, nicknamed Anne by exhausted troops who personify their invisible enemy. These insects prey predominantly in shadowed areas near clear flowing water, exactly the environmental conditions present at Lunga Point and throughout the operational perimeter. The trap system must successfully lure them away from sleeping men and concentrate them into the honey-baited collection zones, or the entire effort becomes meaningless. At midnight, working by dim torchlight in the pouring rain, Hank activates the full rig system, opens the flow valve on each unit, and watches honey-scent plumes begin drifting slowly through the humid night air. He holds his torch steady despite shaking hands, observing the bait glisten wetly, watching individual droplets fall in apparent slow motion into the standing water pools below. And through the rain he still hears the broader war, distant explosions on the ridge where infantry probe Japanese positions, fighter plane engines revving for night alert, sporadic machine gun fire crackling off the defensive picket line. The honeybait operation is quiet, nearly invisible. The larger fight remains deafeningly loud, impossible to ignore. As Hank surveys his improvised handiwork in the darkness, a realization crystallizes. This one field expedient invention might genuinely shift the operational balance, if the engineering holds and the biology cooperates. But if the system fails under operational stress, the cost will be measured in human casualties and profound strategic consequences for the entire Guadalcanal campaign. A mosquito lands delicately on the back of his hand. He flicks it away reflexively, unsettled by the presence of the enemy he's trying to trap. The chapter ends as he leans forward into the rain-soaked night, feeling the metaphorical weight of hundreds of men's lives resting squarely on his shoulders, the responsibility almost crushing in its intensity and immediacy. Morning light filters weakly through lingering clouds. The operational pace accelerates. Hank inspects all bait units at first light, moving methodically from position to position with his clipboard. Some units show bait depleted almost entirely overnight. Others display no measurable uptake whatsoever, the honey remaining at original levels. He documents precise readings in his engineer's log. Unit number 4, bait level 40% remaining. Unit number 9, intake effectively 0. Unit number 12, tubing blocked by accumulated leaf matter and insect debris. He calls up Corporal Ramirez with hand signals. Change depleted cartridges immediately. Clean all inlet screens and tubing connections. Verify structural integrity of mounting systems. The work continues without pause. Meanwhile, inside the operations tent, Major Allen briefs the engineering section leadership with stark clarity. Malaria casualties are actively reducing our combat strength below acceptable thresholds. We need measurable results within 10 days, or face serious risk of postponing the planned offensive on Cocombona village. Hank feels the urgency sharpen into something resembling a knife pressed against his ribs. The engineering crews are not merely providing support services, they have become frontline combatants in a biological war running parallel to the conventional military campaign. Success or failure here will directly determine whether infantry battalions can mount effective offensive operations. In a small jungle glade near the westernmost dispensers, he observes a squad of Marines settling into their netted bunks for daytime rest after night patrol. They net up carefully, apply insect repellent to exposed skin, and yet some men already cough weakly during the dawn stand-down, bodies weakened by previous malarial infections. In conversation with one Marine, Lieutenant Baker admits quietly that he skipped his atabrine dose yesterday due to persistent nausea. Hank's heart sinks. The honey bait system remains just a hopeful experiment, while the proven medical countermeasures are being voluntarily abandoned by men who should know better. The gap between theory and battlefield reality yawns wide. At midday, rain returns with renewed intensity. The dispensers buzz audibly with insect activity. Flies, mosquitoes, various species, some clearly drawn to the bait, others seemingly ignoring it entirely. Hank deploys a handheld entomological sampling trap to collect specimens from inside the bait unit's catch screen. He counts carefully by sliding his torch beam across the mesh. Dozens of Anopheles mosquitoes, trapped and dead. He transfers specimens into a glass vial for later analysis by the medical detachment. The data represents genuine progress, measurable and documented, but the chapter ends on mounting tension. He hears the sharp crack of rifle fire echoing across the jungle ridge. Japanese patrols probing American defensive positions, and realizes with uncomfortable clarity the mosquito war and the conventional war against Japanese forces are completely merged here in this steaming jungle. If the bait system fails to control disease vectors, it will not be only mosquitoes that strike down American soldiers. Enemy bullets will find weakened, fever-ridden men unable to return effective fire or hold defensive positions under pressure. 2 days later, the first measurable operational effect emerges from the data. Fewer men are being pulled off the front line with acute fever onset. Hank receives a quiet but meaningful congratulatory nod from Captain Perez inside the medical tent during evening rounds. The daily log shows a 12% drop in new malaria case reports within the specific sector utilizing the honeybait units, compared to adjacent sectors still relying solely on nets and atabrine prophylaxis. Hank allows himself one brief exhale of relief, the first moment of validation after weeks of doubt and improvisation. But his respite is cut brutally short. Lieutenant Baker reports during afternoon inspection that Unit Number 7's bait cartridge was completely emptied in just 6 hours of operation, twice as fast as the established average depletion rate. The data suggests either an unexpected swarm concentration beyond engineering predictions or a fundamental failure in the insect diversion mechanism that defeats the trap's purpose. Hank immediately jumps into corrective action, increasing cartridge volume capacity, adding a supplemental sugar yeast mixture to prolong controlled release, and installing baffles designed to modify insect behavior patterns around the dispenser openings. Every variable must be controlled and optimized. He crawls through muddy scrub vegetation to reach a malfunctioning dispenser on the perimeter, hand drilling a replacement feed line while rain drips steadily from his helmet visor onto his hands. The jungle press feels almost unrelenting in its physical intensity. Oppressive humidity, the penetrating stink of decomposing fern material, the steady omnipresent hum of insects that never entirely stops. He works with the focused urgency of someone repairing a damaged gun turret just minutes before a major offensive push begins, because in functional terms, that is exactly what he is doing. The parallel is precise rather than metaphorical. At dusk, the entire engineering section assembles for a briefing on the offensive operation scheduled for 10th November. The 164th Infantry will mount a coordinated assault against entrenched Japanese positions at Matanikau River. Major Allen reminds them with absolute clarity. No net coverage, no bait dispenser coverage, no offensive capability. The equation is that simple. The operational stakes could not be more explicit or immediate. Hank stands in the wet muck beside his one-of-a-kind dispenser installation, the device humming almost inaudibly with trapped insects, utterly voiceless in its function. He knows with certainty that if this improvised invention holds operational integrity, it may genuinely tip the outcome of the upcoming campaign. If the system fails under combat conditions, malaria will bleed the attacking force of combat effectiveness before Japanese defenders fire a single defensive shot. The chapter ends as he watches Marines methodically check their individual mosquito nets and apply fresh insect repellent to their shoulders and necks, knowing intuitively that their collective fate rests partly on the performance of his sticky honey trap, humming quietly in the jungle darkness. Night falls on 9th November, the final hours before the scheduled assault. Hank completes a comprehensive inspection of all 18 operational units, tubing verified clear, cartridges loaded to capacity, mounting stilts secured against storm damage, catch screens intact and functional. He stands on the edge of the airstrip, simply listening. Airplane engines spool up for pre-dawn sorties, infantry boots clank against metal loading ramps, the jungle insect chorus rises to its nightly crescendo of sound. He glances upward at the sky. Low cloud cover, humidity near saturation, rain predicted within hours. He adjusts his helmet strap and steps back into the pouring rain to make final adjustments on 2 units positioned at the far western perimeter, his boots sucking audibly in the mud, rainwater rushing in small streams under the dispenser stilts. Inside a maintenance equipment hut, he overhears medical personnel talking in low, worried tones. If this bait system doesn't hold performance through the assault, we'll be hauling stretchers of fever casualties by dawn tomorrow. The sentence lingers in Hank's mind, heavy with implication. He forces down the rising fear and deliberately sets his mind to the immediate task. The trap system must maintain operational integrity through battle conditions, through chaos and violence, through the unpredictable stresses of nature and human conflict combined. As dawn approaches on 10th of November, the offensive will launch across multiple sectors. The jungle will erupt with the controlled violence of modern warfare, bullets, bombs, artillery fire, human screams. Meanwhile, invisible and relentless, the mosquito swarm will strike again as it does every night, indifferent to human conflict. Hank trudges to his canvas cot for the first sustained sleep in several days. Rest comes in fragments, dreams populated by images of flying insects, honey that flows incorrectly, supply lines bending and leaking under pressure. He drifts into unconsciousness as the rain continues hammering the corrugated metal roof above, a steady percussion that fills the darkness. The chapter closes with the low, barely audible hum of the dispenser system, his creation, his responsibility, that must now carry the enormous weight of survival for hundreds of men facing combat in disease-ridden jungle terrain. On 10th of November 1942, at 05:12 in the morning, the attack commences. The 164th Infantry Regiment advances through dense jungle vegetation toward the Japanese stronghold positions at Matanikau River. Hank remains on standby at the forward engineer station, positioned just behind the advancing infantry line. He wears standard khaki work smock and his tool belt, but his primary focus stays locked on the radio communication, net monitoring casualty reports and operational status. The air grows thick with gun smoke, raindrops still falling intermittently through the canopy. The sharp clatter of machine gun fire echoes from multiple directions simultaneously. Inside his radio headset, dispatch crackles. Engineering section, this is headquarters. Track all casualties by category. Remain on net for updates. Hank slaps the receiver to one side and sprints toward the row of bait unit installations. The assault must proceed continuously for 72 hours to achieve objectives. He commits to checking bait intake levels every 3 hours throughout the operation. Unit number 2 shows intake volume doubled overnight compared to baseline. Unit number 11 registers essentially none. Something fundamental has changed in the insect behavior patterns. He leaps down into the muddy ditch, unscrews the cartridge access panel, flips the protective cover, and immediately observes the problem. The mesh screen was torn completely through by a foraging rat seeking the sugar. He curses under his breath, adrenaline spiking. He replaces the damaged component with a fresh mesh bag from his supply kit, secures all connection lines, and verifies the seal. His blood-soaked jungle boots slip in the mud as he climbs out. The overlapping stench of spent ammunition cartridges, decomposing vegetation, industrial insect spray, and human sickness swirl together in the humid air, creating a sensory assault that defies description. Simultaneously, the medical tent logs an entire offline rifle squad, 18 men incapacitated with acute chills and high fever overnight, unable to participate in the assault. The Colonel's operations staff officer sighs audibly while reviewing the report. Malaria is biting our combat strength again, exactly when we can least afford losses. Hank's stomach tightens with renewed anxiety. He keys his radio. Headquarters, dispenser repair completed, monitoring frequency increased to hourly checks. The acknowledgement comes back, terse and professional, as the infantry charges forward through the jungle, and the percussion of grenades echoes across the operational area. Hank watches mosquitoes, visibly redirecting their flight patterns toward the honeybait units, rather than toward the netted sleeping areas. A flicker of hope rises, accompanied by persistent risk and uncertainty. The chapter ends as he steadies his flashlight beam on a dense swarm of mosquitoes spiraling into the nearest dispenser unit. He realizes his improvised trap may actually be outperforming the standard issue mosquito nets in measurable insect capture, but he carries no guarantee whatsoever that the system will maintain performance integrity through the violence and chaos of sustained combat operations stretching across the next 3 critical days. Afternoon on the same day, the frontal assault reaches maximum intensity. Combat engineers blow barbed wire obstacles with satchel charges. Infantry sprint through shell-scratched scrub vegetation under heavy fire. Hank operates from the forward engineer pit, wading waist-deep through standing water, systematically replacing depleted honey cartridges under impossible conditions. He glances at the readout from one critical unit. Bait level, dropping far faster than engineering predictions indicated. He calculates rapidly in his head. At this accelerated depletion rate, the cartridge will run completely dry in approximately 8 hours, too soon to maintain coverage through the night. He immediately orders Ramirez to prepare emergency replacement cartridges from reserve supplies. Meanwhile, a Japanese mortar round tears into a nearby tree with devastating effect, showering the area with wood fragments, uprooting thick vines, hurling coral rocks through the air like shrapnel. Hank is physically thrown backward by the concussive blast, his tool belt ripped partially free, and the nearest dispenser unit emits a sharp hissing sound. A critical tubing joint has ruptured under the shockwave. Without hesitation, he dives forward into the mud, sealing the breach with his bare hands while fumbling for repair materials. The overwhelming roar of combat and the mechanical hiss of his damaged apparatus become functionally indistinguishable in the chaos. Across the contested battle line, infantry unit numbers continue shrinking. The Japanese mount fierce counterattacks. American ammunition stocks run dangerously low. The medical situation report flashes across all command nets. Malaria, incapacitation, and combat fatigue together are proving more limiting to offensive capability than direct enemy fire. The statistical reality becomes impossible to ignore. Hank wipes mud and sweat from his face, the sugar-saturated air now smelling equally of spent artillery shells and fermenting honeybait. The oppressive physical sensation of mosquitoes biting his exposed neck compounds his misery. He races back to the headquarters tent to deliver a critical status readout. Positive mosquito diversion effect confirmed through field observation. Dispenser units in Western Segment are attracting approximately 3 times baseline insect intake compared to control areas. Headquarters personnel nod acknowledgement, but immediately underline the operational imperative. Continue monitoring all casualty categories closely. Maintain supply chain integrity at all costs. Hank realizes the fundamental shift occurring. His honeybait methodology is working, not merely as a field trial or experimental system, but as a genuine operational factor in maintaining unit combat readiness under extreme conditions. The chapter ends with Hank standing motionless, staring toward the jungle edge where exhausted infantry withdraw in rotating shifts, moving with visible limps and profound fatigue. He hears their labored breathing, observes their gaunt faces and 1,000-yard stares, and knows with absolute certainty that the bait system's continued performance may represent the critical margin explaining why they can still hold defensive positions and mount limited offensive operations rather than collapsing entirely under the combined weight of disease and enemy action. Night descends from 11th of November into 12th of November, the operational turning point. Hank positions himself directly beside Unit Number 4, the most isolated and exposed installation on the outermost defensive line. Rain has finally subsided. Thick ground mist hovers motionless over the drainage ditch, visibility reduced to arm's length. He carefully unscrews the cartridge access panel and peers inside by torchlight. Bait completely depleted, an enormous insect swarm clustered beneath the collection screen, the bodies of dead mosquitoes literally plugging the mesh openings with their accumulated mass. He records the staggering number in his field notebook. 482 mosquitoes captured in this single trap during the last 6 operational hours. The previous baseline average stood at approximately 127 insects per comparable period. The increase defies his initial engineering estimates. A sudden shriek cuts through the darkness from the infantry line. Radio traffic erupts. Enemy forces running low on ammunition and supplies. Japanese units observed slipping away from contested positions under cover of darkness. Headquarters message follows immediately. Malaria casualty rates in Western Sector have decreased by 45% compared to last reporting period. Hank allows himself one deep breath, feeling something close to vindication. The improvised invention has measurably shifted the operational outcome in ways that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier, but the brief respite ends quickly. He immediately steps up his maintenance rounds, systematically checking each unit, swapping depleted cartridges for fresh ones, physically moving mounting stilts to higher ground to prevent flood damage from predicted storms. Sweat and bone-deep exhaustion compress subjective time into a single sustained line of focused purpose, every action deliberate. At 02:45 in the morning, his radio headset crackles urgently. Engineering section stand by. Ammunition supply dump near your position has taken enemy fire. Prepare for defensive perimeter support. The explosion rocks his entire world. Fragments of shattered timber rain down across his immediate location, some pieces still burning. He scrambles to his feet and runs toward the dump's perimeter, rapidly deploying his tool belt equipment, jacks and wedges, to shore up a collapsed wooden shelving unit so men can evacuate critical ammunition crates before a secondary explosion. His hands remain slippery with residual honey and mechanical oil, making every grip uncertain. He manages to prop open a jammed access door mere seconds before a second. Larger blast erupts nearby. He sweats. He breathes in ragged gasps. The conventional war and his biological trap converge in real time, inseparable. In the brief lull following the explosions, he returns to Unit Number 4. Beyond the sweet sucrose cloud drifting through darkness, only jungle sounds and insect hum remain audible. He realizes with sudden clarity, survival in this war depends not only on machines and ammunition keeping men alive. It equally depends on biology, human ingenuity, and rapid adaptation to impossible circumstances. He stakes a fresh honey cartridge into the dispenser housing as the first pale glimmer of dawn begins touching the jungle canopy overhead. The chapter ends as the sun's earliest light penetrates the vegetation. An infantry convoy begins its forward advance with measurably fewer sick men on stretchers, moving at faster operational pace than the previous week. Hank stands back from his work, tool belt hanging heavy on his hips, his heart feeling marginally lighter despite crushing fatigue. The battle continues raging across the ridgelines, but the tide may have genuinely turned, one sticky trap at a time. On 13th of November 1942, 2 days following the decisive engagement, the 164th Infantry Regiment holds the critical Matanikau River defensive line against repeated Japanese probes. Malaria casualties have plunged across units, equipped with the honeybait dispenser coverage. Overall combat effectiveness has been restored to 78% in the western sector, covered by Hank's installations, compared to 53% in adjacent areas, still relying solely on conventional prophylaxis. The official medical report concludes with measured optimism. Disease attrition from malaria vectors successfully mitigated. Operational tempo now sustainable for extended campaign duration. At dawn, Hank walks slowly along the airstrip perimeter, his body aching with accumulated fatigue. He watches a P-39 Aerocobra fighter taxi past, the pilot offering a casual salute as he climbs toward the cockpit for morning patrol. The familiar smell of aviation gasoline, the mechanical hum of radial engines warming up, the gradual clearing of jungle mist, all signal a return to sustainable operations. He reflects on the past weeks, build, fail, adapt, deliver results. He remembers the sweat-soaked nights crouching beside leaking dispensers, the broken, tubing connections repaired under fire, the rapid cartridge changes during mortar attacks, the persistent high-frequency whine of mosquitoes that never stopped. The human cost behind the clinical numbers haunts him. Individual soldiers who sickened and collapsed, medics overwhelmed by patient loads, far exceeding capacity, entire infantry battalions reduced to skeleton strength by microscopic parasites. He passes the medical tent and sees Lieutenant Baker sitting outside, now recovered from his malarial episode, chewing slowly on a sandwich, his skin still carrying the faint yellow tinge of atabrine medication. Baker notices Hank and nods, saying quietly, "Thanks for what you did, engineer. Word is your traps made the difference." Hank nods acknowledgement, but remains silent. Inside, he knows. It was never just him alone. It was the collective effort of everyone who refused to accept defeat from an invisible enemy. Inside the operations tent, he spots a notation in the official engineering log. Field Experiment Bravo 43, Honeybait Vector Control, demonstrates promising operational results, strong recommendation for expanded deployment to other island campaigns throughout the theatre. He allows himself a thin smile. The improvised trap will extend beyond Guadalcanal's jungle. The Pacific War will continue rolling forward across countless islands. But for this moment, in this place, one unconventional tool designed by one determined man made a measurable difference in outcomes. The chapter ends with the sun climbing higher over the Pacific Ocean, a new day of military operations beginning, and the quiet, persistent whisper of honeybait dispensers continuing their work near the jungle's edge, invisible to most, but functionally critical to the men they protect. Months pass into early 1943. Hank Harrison is formally awarded a commendation by the War Department's Bureau of Tropical Diseases for innovative and effective contribution to disease vector control operations in the Pacific Theater of Operations. He stands at attention in pressed uniform, the small medal pinned to his chest, surrounded by the smell of polished leather boots and starch-pressed fabric. Yet he feels oddly disconnected from the ceremony. Back in the Guadalcanal jungle, his improvised tool represented immediate life-saving necessity, now reduced to a bureaucratic file entry and official recognition that feels abstract and distant from battlefield reality. The gap between combat experience and institutional acknowledgement remains unbridgeable. He reads again the archival statement that motivated his original work. If the malaria situation in forward theatres is not brought under effective control, the operational efficiency of the whole army will be greatly and perhaps catastrophically impaired. The words still carry weight. He thinks of the jungle environment, the relentless insects, the sticky honey bait, the exhausted men who marched forward because they did not, collapse shaking with malarial fever in muddy tents. He thinks of the enormous psychological weight pressing on his shoulders during that rain-soaked night beside Unit Number 4, when everything balanced on whether his makeshift dispenser would continue performing under impossible conditions. In his mind's eye, he returns to Guadalcanal with perfect clarity. The night air thick and humid with gathering mosquitoes, the distant mechanical shudder of machine gun fire from defensive positions, the sweet fermented hiss of honey dripping slowly into collection pools, the urgent bone-deep certainty that his improvised dispenser absolutely had to perform or men would die needlessly. He realizes modern war is not fought exclusively with rifles and artillery and bombs dropped from aircraft. War is equally fought with human ingenuity, relentless adaptation to novel problems, and the desperate will to survive against enemies, both visible and microscopic. Success comes from unexpected directions. He steps away from the award ceremony stage, deliberately leaving behind the spotlight and official recognition, because the real work continues in steaming jungles, coral islands, and remote deserts, where the smallest enemy can ground an entire army if left unchallenged. His invention, once dismissed by some skeptics as merely a dumb carpenter's trick with surplus honey, quietly contributed to saving thousands of lives across the Pacific Island campaigns that followed Guadalcanal. The final image remains fixed in memory. The honey bait dispenser unit, still mounted on improvised wooden stilts at the jungle's edge, functionally invisible to passing observers, yet maintaining constant vigilance. Silence descends, and in that silence lives the persistent hum of what might ultimately be called victory, measured not in territory captured, but in lives preserved to fight another day.